You know what's funny about my little GoPro here? Is I went in to get a part for it, and the guy's like, "That's so old." I'm like, seriously? Just because the GoPro 4 just came out, you're saying my 2 is old? Yeah, the new one. So I'm like, seriously? Come on, pal. It's like having a phone, right? If your phone's not like the newest and everything, your friends look at you like weird. I have a friend that still has a flip phone. Really? That thing's so cool. It's so Star Trek. It's like, beam me up, Scotty. It's so cool. Love it. Of course, we're stuck with what? Our smartphones that aren't so smart. I spelled out a word the other day. I can't tell you what the word is. I got in trouble. Yeah. It spelled something else and sent it. And when my friend got the text, they're like, "You want to do what to me?" And I'm like, "No." The phones aren't smart. They're against us. Holy cow. Okay, so we are in the eye. Now, there's a few things in the eye that I'm not going to hold you to. Read over them. There might be one or two questions based around cranial nerves. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep all that stuff from 241 fresh in your mind. I don't want it to slip away. So if there's something, I will actually say, hey, link this up to a cranial nerve and use it that way. So accessory structures of the eye. Now, they provide protection, lubrication, and support. Okay, so we've got our eyelid. We've got the superficial epithelium of the eye and the lacrimal apparatus. Did you guys know that you had apparati? An apparatus? Did you know you had an apparatus? You know what it produces? Tears. Tears. Yeah. So lacrimal apparatus, we're just talking about tear duct, all that goes to that. Okay? So let's start off with the eyelid. A continuation of skin. Blinking keeps the surface of the eye lubricated and free of dust and debris. Now, literally, if you get something in your eye, what's the reflex? Yeah, you start blinking. In fact, if you start blinking rapidly right now, your eyes will actually tear up. Okay? So, and that's what it's doing. Now, palpebral fissure, the gap that separates the free margin of the upper and the lower eyelids. Okay? So, upper, lower, fissure right in the middle. No big deal. Eyelids, well, where the two eyelids connect, we're getting a little too in detail. Just know what we have an eyelid. We know that we have a lacrimal apparatus. Eyelashes, robust hairs that prevent foreign matter from reaching the surface of the eye. Eyelashes. Okay, so I got something for you. Okay, robust. You know how they stay robust? Have you ever looked at a guy's eyelashes? They're long. They're like, I can catch a fly with my eyelashes. Like, you know why my eyelashes are so long? I don't touch them. What is that thing that you women and your thingies? It's to make them curl up. You get that thing next to me and I'm afraid. It like has a flat jaw. It looks like it's going to gum me to death. And you're all... and then you're like, oh, it broke it. Okay, it's like grass, right? If you don't cut the grass, if you don't touch the grass does what? It grows. Women, leave them alone. Don't touch them. If you want to be able to catch a fly with your eyelashes, leave them alone. It is? You don't touch yours? And they don't grow? Genetics. Okay, so eyelashes. Yes, they are there to actually prevent debris from getting into your eye. Okay? Tarsal glands secrete lipid-rich products that help keep the eyelids from sticking together. That'd be weird. And now you can't open your eyes. Like, hello, forgot to produce. Okay? Lacrimal, when we talk about lacrimal, we are talking about tears. Okay? The gland itself is actually located in the superior lateral position. Look at me. Superior lateral position of your eye, right here. Okay? It moves across and dumps in to this point right here where it drains out. So, flushing down inward and drains out. Okay? Now that's counterproductive for cleaning the eyes out. So if you're in healthcare, you're not going to actually drain it to the inside. Unbelievably, where does it drain? Does anybody know? What happens to kids when they start crying? Yeah, their nose starts running like there's no tomorrow. It actually runs right into the nose. Okay, the only reason why we produce tears is because, visible tears, there's too much. So there's too much to drain into those little drainage tubes into your nose. So it actually overflows and goes right here. Now in healthcare, we don't want that to happen, so we lean laterally and flush outward. We don't want it to run into the nose or the eyes. Okay? What's that? Is it okay that it does that? Yeah. See, it's even better because if you tear up a little bit, it loosens your bugs, and then you can grab them because it drains right into your nose. Awesome. We're back to that whole bug thing. Conjunctiva. Now, this is interesting because the conjunctiva is an epithelium covering inner surface of the eyelids and outer surface of the ocular conjunctiva. So, what I want you guys to do is, do you guys remember that creepy kid in school? You guys remember him? I'll give you an idea of who he was. He was the kid that took his eyelids and rolled them up, rolled them down, took all his fingers like this, and chased you around the classroom. Remember him? There was always one. You know, he thought it was cool. Well, when he rolled them up like that, you could see that pinky, scary area. That is actually the conjunctiva. It actually lines the inside of the eyelid and rolls across the outer surface of the eye. So literally, when you pull your eyes down like this and you get any debris out of there, it's all one continuous lining called the conjunctiva. So it actually collects debris in there, and of course, what do? And get it out of there, okay? So that lining right there is actually to protect your eye. It's also an area to collect, and interestingly enough, we have a ton of pain receptors in there. Because when you get something in your eye, do you just sit there and go, oh, there's something in my eye, or do you panic? You start blinking and winking and trying to get, So there's pain receptors in there saying, hey, there's something in there. So here you go. This is giving us an idea of what we're looking at. So the whole area is the fissure. This whole area, from point A to point B, this whole area is the fissure. Okay? Notice the corneal limbus. A lot of people will talk about that. It's actually a transition. It's a transition. But this whole area is covered by the conjunctiva. Go ahead.
I just have a question. Conjunctivitis? Which would be
Inflammation of that area.
Of the actual skin part, not the eyeball then.
Not the eye. No, it's actually the covering. So up in the eyelids, upper and lower eyelids, the whole area in the covering.
And then it just causes the eyeball to turn red.
There it is. Okay? So lacrimal apparatus, well, what we're talking about, produces and distributes and removes tears. It's called an apparatus because it's an actual entity that actually houses the gland and the tubing to get rid of the tears. So fornix, a pocket where the palpebral conjunctiva joins the ocular conjunctiva, and then the lacrimal gland, tear gland, again, right up here, okay? Secretions contain lysozymes. Lysozymes. Now, why am I going to say this one more time so it's 3 lysozymes? Is because it's extremely important. When we get into the immune system, that's going to keep coming up. It's actually a product, okay, an enzyme that's secreted throughout your entire body, including in saliva. Okay, and it's antibacterial. It actually prevents bacterial's growth, adherence to areas of the body. Okay? So tears collect in the lacrimal lake. Really? That's the first time I've heard it called a lake, but okay. Okay? And then someone tell me what canaliculi are. Yeah, small canals. There we go. You guys got that okay? All right. Okay, lacrimal puncta, canaliculi, sacs, and then... Go ahead. It's what?
You don't want to hear that.
That's okay. I'm sure it's an inside joke and I won't get it.
Yes.
Okay? Now, nasal lacrimal duct. Nasal lacrimal duct. Well, we're talking about the nose. So it literally is a duct that runs from this point into your nose and drains. Hence the reason why when kids start crying, right off the bat, what do their nose start doing? Running. And there you go. Now this is kind of a hideous, scary, ridiculous, out of control picture, but it is what it is. What's with the bone, really? They couldn't just give us a face and then outline it with everything else, but whatever. Notice where the gland is. Does everybody see where the gland is? Right here. Comes across and then all the way down and drains here and then down into the nose. Okay? Excessive tears, like normal tears right now, if you do this, they'll build up a little bit, and guess where they're going to go? Into your nose. But if you start crying, the hole's not big enough. The canal's not big enough for it to drain into your nose, so where does it go? Outside of your face, and people can see that you're tearing up. All right? Now, is that a bad thing? No. How many people have actually gone outside and got like that cold air, and all of a sudden you start tearing up, and it starts running on your face? So it's just protective. It's protective. Okay? Three layers of the eye. Outer fibrous layer, intermediate vascular layer, and deep inner layer. Now, I don't really like the way that they did this. Okay? I really don't like the way they did this. This is actually kind of horrible. So let's rewrite it, okay? So outer fibrous layer can stay. Intermediate vascular layer, it's a choroid. Okay? And it's a muscular layer. It is vascular. And then deep inner layer is actually, unbelievably, it is actually your receptor layer. Receptor layer. Okay, and that's a little bit better. This is I wouldn't have never even written it like this. So eyeball is hollow. It is divided into two cavities, a large posterior cavity and a smaller anterior cavity. Now, let's be careful with our words. They chose cavity, but in the biggest majority of the books in your guys' lab, it's actually going to say this. Segment. Segment. So it's saying that it's a large posterior and a small anterior. So let's do this. I'm just going to do a circle, so I apologize for how simplistic it is. But there's your circle. Okay? Right? That's your lens. That is your dividing line. Posterior segment or cavity, and seg or cavity. Okay? Now, we have to be really careful with this, and that's why I said choose your words, is because there's also an anterior chamber and a posterior chamber. And guess where they're both found? Inside the anterior segment or cavity. Both of these chambers are found inside there. All right, and where are they found? Well, here's our lens. Then we have this wonderful thing called a iris. Okay, and the iris does this. Big, more light. Small, less light. It actually increases or decreases the size of the pupil. The pupil's just a hole. The pupil doesn't actually do anything. The iris does something. So if the iris dilates, the pupil gets bigger. If the iris constricts, the pupil gets smaller. The pupil is just a hole. The pupil doesn't do anything. Let me say that one more time. The pupil is just a hole. So if a police officer runs up to you and says, "Why are your pupils dilated?" Look at him and go, "My pupils aren't dilated. My irises are dilated. But my pupils aren't doing anything, officer. What are you on? Are you on something? Why are you looking at me? Why'd you pull me over? You don't even know the difference between an iris and a pupil." I know. Get arrested for that one. But get out of the car. I don't care about your irises. So, if this is the iris right here, that means that this area right here and right here is the pupil. This area. Okay? So in front of the iris is the antechamber. Behind the iris, but in front of the lens, is the postchamber. Okay? So we do have a large posterior cavity or segment. We have a smaller anterior cavity or segment. In the anterior cavity or segment, we have two chambers, an anterior and a posterior chamber. We need to know that because we're actually going to circulate aqueous humor. Let me say that one more time. We're going to circulate aqueous humor. Okay. So let's move on from these hollow. Okay, so taking a closer look at this, this is a decent picture. I actually kind of like this picture. I like the ones I have better, but hey, this one will do. So let's take a real close look. Now this is where you guys really, no pun intended, have to visually pay attention to detail. Let's start off with this. This gigantic area right here, this gigantic area is the posterior segment or cavity. See where the lens is here? Everything in front of the lens is the anterior segment or cavity. Now let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go a little more intense. Everything in this area right here in front of the iris is the anterior chamber. Everything between the lens and the iris right here is the posterior chamber. Okay? Now let's back up 2 slides. I'll give you guys a second to write this down. Let's back up a couple slides to this. This is what I told you I didn't care for too much, right? So here comes the visual on this. The first one that they said is the sclera. The sclera is this white fibrous area right here. White fibrous area. Okay? The second one in the middle is the choroid that I told you about. See it right here? The choroid in the middle. But notice where the choroid comes out. Right here with this and the iris, which is all muscular and vascular. It actually constricts and relaxes. Both of them do. So the iris can constrict and relax, and this right here, the ciliary body, okay, can actually do the same thing. In fact, if it contracts and relaxes, what does the lens do? Flatten out or bulge? Flatten out or bulge? So what do we do with our lens? Focus or not focus? Go figure. Okay? So, and then last but not least, the inner, which I said was what?
Receptor.
The receptor. The inner is the retina. See this inner layer in here? The retina. And the retina has all of our receptors. All of our receptors. And you guys know those receptors as rods and cones. You know the receptors as rods and cones. Okay? So let me elaborate on those rods and cones for a second so this starts burning into your memory and you guys remember it. I like to go to car shows because I see black hot rods at the show. When I go to the show, I see black hot rods go to the show, and they're so cool looking. I love to see the black hot rods at the show. But on a summer day, I like to go to the ice cream truck and get my colorful ice cream cone with all my flavors. It's so colorful with all my flavors. My ice cream cone with all my flavors is so colorful. I love my colorful ice cream cone. So rods, the receptors for rods do what? Black. Black. The receptors for cones do color. You have a black hot rod and a colorful ice cream cone. So cones do color, rods do black. Black and white, basically. A little shades gray here and there, but we're going to talk about gray because with the current movies out and all that other crazy stuff going on, we really don't want to talk about gray. Okay? So there we go. Rods do what? Black. Black and white. Okay? Cones do color. On a nice summer day, you eat a colorful ice cream cone. If you go to the car show, you're going to see a black hot rod. Right. Okay, so as we take a look at this, this picture here, let's add a few more things to it. Let's elaborate a little bit more on it. The first one is this posterior segment or cavity back here is actually filled with what's called vitreous humor. Now it's going to spell it out for you here in a second, but it's called vitreous humor. But it starts with a V, and it's in the posterior aspect. Vitreous humor. Up here up front, in this segment up front here, this cavity up front, it is filled with aqueous humor. Doesn't A always come before V? Doesn't A always come before E, as in efferent? Right? Humor? Like, ha ha ha. Humor. Yeah, not kidding. Joking, but not kidding. Humor. Aqueous humor, vitreous humor. Aqueous humor, vitreous humor. A always comes first, so A is in the anterior segment. V always comes last, so it's in the posterior segment. Aqueous humor, vitreous humor. Okay, I'm saying this like way too many times. That means this whole entire thing is going to be on a test. For fact. Let's start off from the front. So we start off, okay, technically, this area right here, right where the line is for the pupil, is actually considered the anterior pole. Some books show it, some don't. It's not a big deal. But take a look at this. This lining all the way up under here, all the way to the front, is actually the conjunctiva. Then we have the cornea, okay? Then we have the anterior segment with the anterior chamber in it. Then we have the pupil. Then we have the posterior chamber before the lens. Then we have the lens. Then we have the posterior segment or cavity filled with vitreous humor. Then we actually strike the retina. What I just mentioned to you is the pathway of light. Cornea, anterior segment, anterior chamber, pupil/iris, posterior chamber, lens, posterior segment, which has vitreous humor in it. From the posterior segment or cavity, we strike the retina. The retina is made up of what two receptors? Rods and cones. Which one is color? Thank you. Any questions?
What was the anterior pole, you said?
right? The anterior pole is basically, most books don't label it, but some will, so don't get confused by it, is right here. See this little area right here where the pupil line is? That is considered the anterior pole, like the North Pole and South Pole, but it's the anterior pole of your eye. Some books will say it, some won't. So if you see it, don't get overly excited like, oh my gosh, where'd the cornea go? The cornea is still there. Okay? It's just that we have this, it's actually called the anterior pole. I know, weird, but hey.
So, the posterior transfer, it comes after the pupil and, the lens, after.
Before the lens and after the pupil. So her question was the anterior or the posterior chamber. The posterior chamber comes after the pupil, but before the lens. After the pupil, but before the lens. Any other questions? Okay, now what we're talking about right now, other than the information I gave you on the pathway of light, okay, notice I said the pathway of light, not transduction. The pathway of light, what I just told you, is actually a test question. So it would behoove you to actually understand all the areas that a beam of light will pass before transduction. Because then afterwards, when it does transduce, there's another pathway that you have to learn. So when you're reading a question, whether the question is from this class or whether the question's from a program you're going into, they could ask you this, and I've seen it on a lot of them. List the pathway of light or list the pathway of transduction. Two separate things. Light is going all the way to the retina. Transduction is from the retina, rods and cones, to the brain. Two separate pathways. Okay? We have two separate pathways. Go for it. The pathway of light. Okay, the pathway of light is from the cornea to the anterior chamber through the pupil/iris to the posterior chamber through the lens into the posterior cavity or segment, which is filled with vitreous humor, to the retina. That is the pathway of light. Once we strike the retina, which is a whole new ball game, and I'll talk to you guys about how it strikes the retina. Once we strike the retina, transduction occurs. So then our pathway, rods and cones, okay, bipolar cells, ganglion cells, actually ganglion cells, bipolar cells. No, yeah, I was right. So bipolar cells, ganglion cells, optic nerve. Okay, when we get into the optic nerve, we go through the optic chiasm. From the optic chiasm, we break off several areas in the brain, including the superior colliculi. What's that? C of love? C about visual startle reflex. You're like, C of love? I know, it's spring. All the birds are doing their thing, so people are getting excited. Yeah. Okay, so that's a whole different pathway, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. What?
So rods go to brain, right? Rods and cones.
Rods and cones actually go through a process to get to the brain. And because you asked me that question, I'm going to put you on the spot. What part of the brain does visual stimulus go to? All right, come on. Right here. The occipital what? Okay. Good. Occipital lobe. Yeah. This whole giggle bunch up here. I'm going to have to separate you guys. Okay, so two pathways. We're covering right now just the pathway of light. Now, I briefly went through the pathway of transduction, but man, we got a lot going on there. Okay? So, Wow, ridiculous. That looks like, yeah, that's horrible. That's a horrible picture, but hey, it is what it is. Notice that they put the anterior cavity and posterior cavity. Really? Come on. Neural part and pigment part? Is that technical? How about neural layer and pigmented layer? Part? What is that? That's like what I put in my hair, a part. Silliness. Whoa. Ooh, yeah. You know what? I might actually have to have you guys learn this whole image. This one's looking pretty stylish. Okay. It's convoluted. It is totally convoluted. But unfortunately, it is one of those ones you're going to have to use to study off of. Why? What? Watch. What does this say right here? Anterior and posterior chambers. Do they identify the chambers in the cavity? They do. They totally do. Visual axis, it's actually talking about the direction or pathway of light. Visual axis, the pathway of light. Notice it does not, this is a key point, it does not strike the optic disc. It comes over here. Now they abbreviated, they said fovea, but it's actually called the fovea centralis. Okay, the central focus point. The fovea centralis. So they abbreviated it there, but yeah, fovea centralis. They do split this eyeball up. The sclera, the choroid, and the retina. The sclera, white layer. Choroid, vascular layer. Look at all the blood vessels in there. And then retina. This is actually your neural layer. That neural layer does actually have two parts, but they said parts in the previous slide. We back up, neural and pigment. Okay? Optic disc. The optic disc is actually a blind spot. In fact, that's actually what it's called. It's a technical term. It's called the blind spot. That's where your optic nerve and your blood vessels go in and out of the eye. Actually, in with blood vessels, out with neuron. Blind spot, optic disc. Just saying. Okay? Now, ora serratus, it's actually just a dividing line. It's kind of a dividing line in the posterior chamber. Serratus, how many people have serrated knives? They use them to cut bread and other things like that. Yeah, serratus. Yeah, same thing. That's what they're saying. It's the shape. Okay? Ciliary process, ciliary body. Okay? The body just holds on to the ciliary ligaments. Those ligaments are attached to the lens, and so contracting and relaxing actually changes the shape of the lens. Okay? Cornea, iris, chambers, pupil. Notice they said the edge of the pupil. Pupil is just what? It's just a hole. That's all it is. They just gave it a name. Okay? Questions on this image? It does seem convoluted, but once you start working through it, it's actually not that bad. Fibrous layer. Well, it's the white layer of the eye. It does connect to the cornea. It's called the sclera. So the sclera does about 3/4. Some people say 2/3. About 3/4, 2/3. Posterior aspect of the eye. The cornea does the 1/3 or quarter front aspect of the eye, anterior. Vascular layer. What does it do? Well, it provides a route for blood vessels, lymphatics. Okay, regulates the amount of light that enters the eye. What is the thing that regulates the amount of light in the eye? The iris. Nice. Glad you didn't say pupil. Because pupil's just a hole. It doesn't do anything. The iris regulates the amount of light that comes into the eye. Constrict limits the amount of light. Dilate increases the amount of light. Secretes and reabsorbs aqueous humor. Well, yeah. And that's in the anterior chamber and posterior chamber. And then controls the shape of the lens, which is essential for focusing. And those are the ciliary bodies, the ciliary bodies. Back to this image again, must be important because guess what? They keep bringing it up again. Vascular layer. Vascular layer. The iris contains papillary muscles, change the diameter of the pupil. Okay? I like to joke about this, but I don't know if I should or not. No, I won't. I'll be okay. Yeah, gigantic. Tiny. The amount of light that's getting in. Okay? Now, if you're in fight or flight, right there. But did you know that we can be in rest and digest in that too? When you're kicking it on the couch, should be like, and it's dark, and you're in your house and it's dark, and you're kicking on the couch, and you got candles, because it needs to let more light in. So it depends on what's going on. Question in the back. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's why I was going to joke about it, but I refrained from doing that. It is those the indications of people on something. Yeah. Plus, if you see that, this one dilated and this one constricted, head trauma. So very common for head trauma. So decreased light intensity, increased sympathetic stimulation, increased light intensity, increased parasympathetic stimulation. So depends on what's going on. If you can't see, if it's dark in the room, we're going to actually dilate so that we can actually see more light, take in more light so we can see. So it just depends on where you're at and what's going on. Go ahead.
Is it bad for your eyes when you're on drugs and you dilate, like that let more light in?
It's more bad for your body than it is your eyes. Your eyes are just like, really? Yeah,
Does it vary by person?
it does. Vascular layer, well, the ciliary bodies contain ciliary processes, ciliary muscles that attach to suspensory ligaments. Love saying those words. I don't know why, I just do. Maybe it's the S's. There's a lot of S's in there. If you're not good with S's, it's probably like a nightmare right now. Okay? But I like the S's. Ciliary processes. Okay? Choroid. Vascular layer that separates the fibrous and inner layer, delivers oxygen and nutrients to the retina. That means the retina doesn't pick anything up by itself, it actually has to get it through the choroid. It's a vascular layer. Inner layer, okay? Outer layer called pigmented part, inner called the neural part. That's where the parts came from. I've never heard it called part before. We'll roll with that. Okay, contains the inner neural aspect. Contains visual receptors and association neurons, rods and cones, types of photoreceptors. Photoreceptors, rods, do not discriminate light colors. Highly sensitive to light. Cones provide color vision. Densely clustered around the fovea centralis and macula lutea. Macula lutea. So those are the full names. You guys are hearing the full names on those. Very first time you're hearing it. Okay, provide color vision, densely clustered in fovea centralis and macula lutea. 2 focal points at the axis of light. I'm trying to use the words they're using. So, and there we go. So here's our fovea, right here. Fovea centralis, and around that fovea centralis is the macula lutea. So they're actually both right there, just one's focal and one's a little bit, but that's where all your cones are, because that's where all your light and color's going. This outer area, mainly rods. Okay, right here is your focal point for color. That's why if it's off at all, or the focus is off, what do we have to wear? Glasses, yeah. We have to get that color and light to the right spot. You bet. Okay, let me see where we're at with time. I just want to make sure that we're good, because this, man, this is a mind bender. This is one of those ones that takes you for a ride. It really does. Okay? And what we're talking about here is actually the pathway after light. After light. Okay, so let me see where we're at. Ooh, 5 more ducats. 5 more minutes of pain and suffering. So let's do this. And then I might give you a break. Okay, pathway of light. Pathway of light comes in. It said there was a pigmented layer and then a neural layer. The pigmented layer, ooh, you know what? Let's just example this. No. Yeah, come on, stand up. Come on. This is good. This is actually, she's wearing the right clothing for this. Okay? Stand up straight. Perfect. Okay, so she has a gray, white-ish scarf on, a gray skirt, long dress, short dress, something, whatever. Yeah. What color is this?
Black.
It's kind of a blackish gray. It's more black than anything, right? I mean, yeah. It was probably brilliant black, and then she washed it 100,000 times because it's her favorite coat, and now it's not as black, but it's black, right? This is black, and that's gray. Which one of these do you think, when she goes outside in the sun, where there's lots of light, which one, the skirt or the jacket, is going to absorb the most? The jacket. The jacket. Thank you.